Welcome to Plain Civics. Thank you for joining us. I'm Joe Ullery.
And I'm Bobby Fisher.
And our goal is to break down how government works so you can make the government work for you. We have a special episode for you coming up, so stay tuned. But before we get there, it's time for the Fast Five.
And it's my turn to ask you questions this time.
The Fast Five.
Number one.
Yep.
What is your favorite place to visit? Or where is your favorite? Whichever.
Sure. So I thought about this, Bobby, and I have so many locations I love. Recently, we took a trip to San Diego, and I don't know that it's the city as much as it is the friends that we have that moved there from Indiana. That the only time we get to see them is when we go to San Diego, but it's so different than Indiana with the ocean. And
I was going to say, did you go to the beach when you were there?
We did the different sites, and there's hippie artist beach locations, and it's a fun town to visit.
What is the most adventurous thing you've ever done?
I was a young news reporter, and we had in Indiana a military base, Grissom Air Force Base,
right.
And it eventually became Grissom Reserve Air Base. But I went there as a young cub reporter, and I remember they had a lottery when all the reporters showed up, and I won something for the first time in my life, and it was the opportunity to ride in the tail of a KC-135
Wow.
Stratotanker, which, if you've not seen one, they are massive, and they're basically flying gas stations.
Right.
And in the very back end of the KC-135 Stratotanker, somebody actually lies down and has a joystick, and they fly over other aircraft, lower a boom, and fuel it up in air.
I've seen demonstrations on news, like that's national news or whatever. Obviously, since I live close to there, I've seen them fly, because they usually fly pretty low when they're flying in.
Humongous, and inside you sit long ways on a bench and strap in, like there aren't passenger seats in it. And it really, truly is one of the most unique experiences. We were flying over Kentucky and Indiana and Illinois, and it was all happening like we were over one state before we knew we were into the next one. It was very cool.
I would do that. That sounds cool.
It was awesome.
What is the weirdest thing you own?
Gosh, so many answers. But actually, it's on this desk, and you've asked about it before. And it's a book, and it's called Callahan's Trial Practice Series, Pretrial Discovery and Strategy and Tactics. It's right here. Remember, you said, what are you going to become a lawyer? And I have no explanation as to why I have it other than I saw it at the Goodwill and thought it would look good on my
now it supports your laptop.
computer monitor. Yeah. So I don't know that I've ever cracked it, to be honest with you. I just liked its jacket and its look, and I thought it made me look smart. Exactly.
Okay. Number 4, what was your favorite cartoon when you were a child?
Scooby-Doo. I don't know. I had a sleeping bag with Scooby-Doo on it, but then I remembered it was Marvin Martian on Bugs Bunny, right? And he always
Looney Tunes. It's got to be Looney Tunes.
He wanted to blow up the Earth. Some of his sayings where he was always talking about the space modulator and where's the kaboom? There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
I always think I learned classical music from watching Looney Tunes.
Yes. We didn't realize how sophisticated we were watching Looney Tunes. So Marvin Martian.
Pepe Le Pew. I was trying to get the kitty.
Yeah. He romanced her a few times.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. According to my data, your zodiac sign is Leo, which is characterized as vivacious, theatrical, passionate, natural leader, playful, loyal, consistent, and brave. Do you think these are characteristics you exhibit?
I don't know about the natural leader part. I tend to lead people into trouble. But the rest is fair. Vivacious, definitely. Theatrical.
I knew theatrical was going to be
absolutely
possible.
Passionate, 100%. Playful, absolutely. Consistent, depends on the situation. I would love to tell you and sit here and lie and say I'm always consistent, but there's room for improvement. And then more recently, after my open heart surgery, I'm going to take that compliment of saying brave, but I'm going to take it brave in a humble fashion.
Okay.
That was a great question, by the way. And I'm going to quote you, turnabout is fair play. So what's your sign?
Virgo.
Virgo. All right. So stay tuned.
I figured the theatrical would definitely, because of what I knew.
Yeah. You know what? I'd never seen my zodiac traits written down like that before.
Well, I looked at several different things, and some of them were very consistent, so that's what I tried to pick, the consistent ones.
I would say you can read me pretty well. I'll leave it at that. All right, so that's the Fast Five for today. That was fun. Thank you.
I wouldn't have known, except you told me when your birthday's coming up. So.
It is July 28th, if anybody wants to send a card. All right, so that's the Fast Five today, Bobby. Thank you for that. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about us during the Fast Five, and now that's over, so that means it's time that we actually get to work.
And now our feature presentation.
So I mentioned at the end of the last episode, if you're a regular listener, that this is going to be a special episode. We're going to explore some common misconceptions about various topics related to civics. We tried to think of things we've heard people say that made us stop and think, what? Maybe the what meant that person doesn't know what they are talking about, or maybe it meant, wow, I didn't know that, and I would almost bet other people don't either. So let's dig in. Here's misconception number 1.
Doesn't freedom of speech mean that I can say whatever I want, whenever I want?
No, that is not what freedom of speech means. First, let's remind everyone that freedom of speech is a right protected by the First Amendment, but this right is not absolute. That means that it is not free from restrictions or limitations. It also does not protect all forms of expression. There are actually several well-defined exceptions and limitations for freedom of speech.
So what are those?
Well, some of the exceptions are certain categories of speech not protected by the First Amendment would include obscenity, defamation, incitement to violence, and fighting words. And context matters. The specific context in which speech occurs also can play a role. For example, speech in a school setting may be subject to different rules than speech in a public forum. You know, you go to school, you have rules. They don't want you cussing and swearing for obvious reasons.
Right.
You know,
respect.
Respect and disruption, and might be offensive to people. So they have rules against saying certain things. Another common misconception is that freedom of speech only applies to the government, but it also applies to private entities and their ability to set their own speech-related policies.
And so I'm guessing they silo those things, and there are examples we can give of the government versus the private sector and applying it to freedom of speech.
Right. So some examples, the government, and I'm talking federal government. The First Amendment primarily restricts the government's ability to regulate speech. It prevents the government from infringing on our individual rights to express ourselves. For example, if I want to write a letter to the editor criticizing whoever the current president is, for example, I have the right to do that as long as there are no threats written in the letter. Another example would be if I want to participate in a march protesting a government action and I'm carrying a sign that states my beliefs. I can do this as long as there are no threats, obscenity, defamation, and I don't initiate any violent act while I'm doing that. So those are a couple of government examples. Now in the private sector, private businesses and organizations can set their own speech-related rules and policies. For instance, a social media platform can remove content that violates its terms of service when you first sign up, like
you agree to it.
Yeah, you know, whether it's Facebook or X or Blue Sky or whatever, you know, they tell you up front, although I'm sure most people probably don't read it.
You scroll to the bottom and hit agree.
But they do tell you,
yeah.
You know, you and that's why some people get kicked off. You know, or they say they're in Facebook jail or whatever because they haven't followed those rules and policies and they've violated the terms of service. And then let's say, you know, we had the example a few years back, the NFL player that kneels during the national anthem. That action is not protected speech because it's a private action by a player within the context of his employment, and other entities, including schools, may have rules also that limit certain types of speech, such as obscenity, like we already mentioned. Now, schools could be either private or If it's a public school, then it kind of falls under the government laws. But again, speech is not absolute even for that.
Yeah. And I've seen with schools, like, they want their employees to live up to a certain expectation, whether they're in the classroom or not.
Right. But we have private schools too. So their rules that they have may be different than a public school.
And that would fall under private.
Right. And then back to the NFL situation, for example, if you think about it, the player is employed by whatever, I don't even remember what team it was. Yeah. They did that, and their team had rules in a contract or whatever that the player signed. They may make him pay a fine, or the league, the NFL might fine them or whatever. So there may be some consequences for the player's action, but they can do that. And if they want to pay the fine or whatever, that is not something that the government is going to be able to restrict.
Yeah, so when you take a job, a lot of times you have to sign something. I know in broadcasting, you have to sign a non-compete clause, which means you can't go work at a competition for so long. But you sign and agree to these things, and you're bound by them. Maybe not for life, but for as long as you hold that position.
Right.
All right, so what if I say something that is controversial or unpopular?
It's even more important that unpopular or controversial speech is protected, because that's how ideas spread and how change is often initiated. For example, if we couldn't complain or speak out or whatever, how would anybody ever know? At least brings it into the limelight to be discussed. Otherwise, nobody's ever going to know about
Conversation is how we evolve.
Right. Again, as long as you're not being violent or threatening in any way, make controversy and unpopular should be respected.
It should be appreciated, I think, because that is America.
In conclusion, understanding the nuances of freedom of speech is crucial, and keeping in mind it is not an absolute right, and it can have limitations, particularly when it comes to incitement of violence or obscenity or private entities' ability to regulate speech, private businesses, for example. And I think the biggest misconception about the First Amendment is that it prevents anyone from silencing our speech.
That's the important part.
Yeah, in fact, it's only a limitation on government censorship. A private employer or property owner that isn't the government can censor all they want without violating the First Amendment. State actors are regulated by the First Amendment. Private actors are not.
And I think to say, as many do, this is America. I can say whatever I want. Exactly. Well, you can until you can't. Right?
That blanket statement needs to go away.
I know, yes. And you have the right to say that out loud. Right. All right, so that's that one.
Misconception number 2.
Wasn't the United States created as a Christian nation?
No, the United States was not founded as an official Christian nation. While many of the founding fathers were Christians, and some of the nation's founding documents were influenced by Christian moral principles, the United States Constitution established a secular government, not a religious one, and we have no official state religion. Remember, one of the main reasons many of the early colonists came here was for religious freedom.
Absolutely.
Because they did not have that in England. The framers were committed to religious freedom.
And that means you can worship or not worship.
Exactly.
And pick who you worship.
Right. We talked about that in the Bill of Rights episode. If you're an atheist, you can be an atheist. If you want to be a Catholic, you be a Catholic. And that goes back to the fact that the colonists coming from England had an official state church.
Church of England.
Anglican Church, the Church of England. Mm-hmm. And so if you lived there, you followed that. You could not be a Catholic, or basically you worshipped in the Church of England.
And if you didn't, you were considered a heretic, and you could many times be punished by death.
Mm-hmm. Being a Christian nation would completely go against part of the reason for the founding of our nation. The founding fathers actually had diverse religious beliefs. Some of the founders were Christians, like I said earlier. Some were what are called deists. What that means is they believed in a creator God who created the universe and nature, but the God doesn't intervene in the affairs of the population. They reject ideas of divine revelation, miracles,
predestination,
answered prayers. Yeah. Instead, a deist emphasizes reason and natural laws as a way to understand the world. And if you think about it, we talked a little bit about like John Locke and Hobbes and Montesquieu, and that whole idea of natural rights comes from that. It didn't come from a religious set of beliefs. It came from nature. So they might think, yes, some higher being created this. That's kind of where their belief system stops. And some of the other framers there were a few with other religious views, or there might have been some that were atheists. So they were united in their commitment to a secular government and religious freedom. The Constitution further ensures religious freedom for all citizens, allowing individuals to practice their religion or not practice any without government interference. That's from the First Amendment.
Doesn't the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution actually mention God?
Actually, they don't. The word God never appears in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. The way the Constitution and Bill of Rights are written, the source of all government power and legitimacy is the people. Us. Not any notion of a divine right. And here's kind of a little side note. What's often considered the original Constitution, which is the Constitution and Bill of Rights. And I didn't know this till I read it, and then I actually looked to make sure it was right. So the Constitution starts with the words, "we the people," and the 10th Amendment, which is the end of the Bill of Rights, ends with the words, "to the people."
Bookends.
Yes. So this reinforces the source of our government as the people, not a god. And yes, the word God or references to a deity appears in the Declaration of Independence, but they don't use the word God. They use terms like nature's God. There's that natural rights reference. Creator. Divine providence. These references are found in the context of explaining the source of human rights and the justification for declaring independence from British rule.
So you mean our documents don't actually mention Jesus in them?
No, and not like the God of Christianity or none of that. That's not what they're talking about. I'm going to break that down a little bit more. The Declaration includes the following wording. This is in the first sentence, and it establishes a basis for the rights of the people. Again, those natural rights. They initially were created by some higher being, but that's kind of where thinking stops. So now I'm going to break that down a little bit more. The Declaration includes the following wording. The laws of nature and of nature's God. This is in the first sentence, and it establishes a basis for the rights of the people. Again, those natural rights. So like I said, they initially were created by some higher being, but that's kind of where
inalienable rights.
The thinking stops. It does say endowed by their creator. It does say endowed by their creator. This phrase refers to the source of unalienable rights. The wording supreme judge of the world. This is a reference to God's role as a judge of all people. And then divine providence. This phrase is used to express the founders' reliance on God's protection. Notice that none of these references state which religion's God or creator they are referring to. In conclusion, the Constitution notably omits any mention of a deity. It is a secular document. While the United States was not founded as a Christian nation, Christian ideas and values did influence the founding, in that one of the main reasons colonists came here in the 16 and 1700s was for religious freedom. The framers were committed to religious freedom and the separation of church and state, ensuring that the government would not establish a state religion or interfere with the free exercise of religion. The First Amendment does address religion, specifically prohibiting Congress from establishing a state religion, but it does not mention God. And I'll just point out to end this, shortly after our nation was established in 1797, in the Treaty of Tripoli, which was ratified by the U.S. Senate, it explicitly stated that the U.S. government was, quote, not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, end quote.
Yeah, so this sums up, we all can choose, right? That's why people came here in the first place, because they wanted to decide for him or herself, do I want to be a Christian? Do I want to be in Catholicism? Maybe I join the Catholic Church, but then I decide into it, no, this isn't what I believe. I want to change to something else. So I think that sums up exactly the misconception.
Well, and I would add, too, now that I'm thought about it, that in really recent years, we've had this push towards and more people saying, that we're a Christian nation and those types of things. And, not to get political, but I think keeping in mind that statement from that treaty, that is an official document of the United States written in the early history of our country. And it clearly states, that we were not founded on the Christian religion. And I think it's more relevant, even more so today, because we have developed such a diverse country and nation and people coming from all over the world and representing quite a few different religions.
Many.
That I think it's even more important to keep that in mind, as people should not be trying to push just Christianity more and more into our government.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of, with social media and television and communication, that there's more passion around these topics. People are more emotionally invested in these topics than ever before.
Okay, misconception number 3 kind of goes back to what you said a while ago.
I was just thinking that. I'm going to be like, is she going to realize that I haven't read all the way through this? I remember living this, actually, Bobby. Don't students have to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and don't they have to pray if their teacher tells them to?
No, they do not have to do either of these things if they are attending a public school.
Public school means they're getting public funds.
Right, from state and federal government, yes.
Yeah, so would you just expand on that a little more?
So first of all, reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, which originally did not include the word God, that was added in 1954, but stating or reciting the pledge is not a legal requirement, so that's first. Second of all, making students recite it actually violates the First Amendment, and this is an issue settled by the United States Supreme Court in 1943 when it was ruled in the case of West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. The court ruled that students couldn't be forced to salute the U.S. flag or say the pledge because doing so, and here's the key, would violate their First Amendment rights of free speech, freedom of religion, and establishment of religion. This clause prohibits the government, including school officials and the school board, from forcing individuals to express beliefs they do not hold. This case established that students have the right to abstain from reciting the pledge without fear of reprisal. And in 1954, like I said, the words "under God" were officially added to the pledge, which even more reinforces that court ruling to even a greater extent. I'm going to say, when I was still teaching, actually for years we didn't, not in middle school anyway, we didn't recite the pledge, but after 9/11, patriotism kind of, 9/11 if nothing else, for all the bad things.
Recharged patriotism.
Yes, it restored, and we started doing the pledge back in at the middle school I taught at. We would cover this stuff in my civics class, and then
all the questions start coming.
I would tell my students that they were not required to recite the pledge, but I did ask them in my class if they would at least, be quiet and respectful if they chose not to participate.
So you've got experience in teaching kids. So I'm just curious, in your experience, did you ever have any of your students come to you or say to you in the classroom, well, my teacher said that I was required to stand and recite the pledge? Yeah, that's the nature of kids.
Every year it seems like they'd say, well, Mrs. So-and-so told us we have to, they're middle school kids. And every year there would be somebody. And for a while, when we didn't have a lot of turnover, it was always I'm like, okay. So I said, I'm going to talk to Mr. or Mrs., whoever it was, and explain to them that they really can't
say that.
require you to do that. And I would tell the kids still, if that's who your homeroom is, you still need to
be respectful.
And, and most, I don't know if I doubt that they all recited it, but mine would all stand at least. We would do a moment of silence too after the pledge.
Okay.
But I would tell them, I'll talk to that teacher. And first, I think I would tell them.
Did you go talk to the teacher?
Well, I think first, let me go backwards. First, I would tell the kids, you can mention that in Mrs. Fisher's class, we've talked about this. And then I said, if they still make you do it, then I'll talk. And I said, I did. I did talk to a teacher once about,
oh boy.
I said, you can't.
Yeah.
And I approached it diplomatically, and I said, that we're in public school, and there are court cases so I said, you can ask them to be respectful and all that, but can't make them do it.
Good information.
Good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Another big objection includes the fact that a constitutional or democratic republic built on freedom of dissent should not require its citizens to pledge allegiance to it, and that people who are most likely to recite the pledge every day are small children in schools who cannot really give their consent.
Right.
Or even they don't understand the pledge that they're making, Now middle school, they might start to by then, but elementary kids, they don't know what they just are saying a bunch of words. It doesn't mean anything to them. High school, they should understand, but
by then they become Sassy Sally and Sassy Sam.
But if you think about it, we're able to have our own beliefs and to speak out, and maybe you're mad about something that, the whole idea of freedom of belief and speech and everything. If we didn't have that, then you wouldn't have freedom of dissent. So it's just really important to know that some people may not feel that they're allegiant to what's going on. And since 1954, there have actually been cases since then. One, like in, I think, the 1990s, that was all about because they added the word God.
Yeah.
Because they did not consider themselves Christian, or actually, I think they were atheists. So they brought another case that ended up in the Supreme Court. I mean, you could look them up. There's lots of Supreme Court cases, and every time this is upheld by federal courts.
You mentioned just a second ago that you held a moment of silence after the pledge.
Moments of silence have to be that, where, the student can just stand there and vegetate, or they can, if they want to say a prayer in their head.
Silently.
Or just think about maybe something bad that happened in the world or whatever. That's fine, but you can't say we're going to say the Lord's Prayer, or we're going to say a prayer together, or the teacher can't stand up there and say a prayer. Those moments may seem kind of innocuous, but they have faced legal challenges depending on how they were handled. There are several Supreme Court cases. The Supreme Court in Engel versus Vitale in 1962, and another one, Abington District versus Shemp in 1963, ruled that school prayer and Bible reading in public schools violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Remember, it says we have freedom of religion, but also that there's no established religion.
Right.
So if you're doing Bible reading, that is a book of Christianity. So you're forcing a particular religion into the children, and that violates that clause. Not all moments of silence are unconstitutional, and there was a case in 1985, Wallace versus Jaffrey, where the Supreme Court held that a moment of silence could be considered constitutional if it had a secular purpose and did not advance or inhibit religion. This decision emphasized the importance of maintaining a clear separation of church and state within the public school system. All right, misconception number 4.
Illegal immigrants and people living here on special visas don't have any rights. Answer, well, I know that answer.
That is false. And since, this has been in the news a lot in the last 6 months, facts are facts. Both undocumented immigrants, or illegal, however you want to call them, and those in the U.S. on special visas do have certain rights under the U.S. Constitution and laws. Now, while their rights might differ from those of us who are citizens, they are still entitled to protections like due process and protection from unreasonable search and seizure.
So one question as we unpack this, Bobby, is there a difference between rights of undocumented immigrants and those that are here through the government on special visas?
Yes, there actually are. Undocumented or illegal immigrants are protected by the 5th and the 14th Amendments, which guarantee due process and equal protection under the law. So what this means is that they have the right to a fair legal process if their life, freedom, or property is at risk. This includes the right to a fair trial if facing criminal charges or deportation. The 4th Amendment protects individuals from unreasonable search and seizures by law enforcement. They have the right to remain silent when questioned by law enforcement or immigration officials.
Miranda.
And should not be compelled to answer questions about their immigration status. Undocumented immigrants have the right to access courts to seek legal remedies or defend themselves in legal proceedings. That's why we've heard so much controversy about like the people that were flown out,
to El Salvador.
And they weren't given a chance or weren't given enough time
to even talk with an attorney.
Yeah, and they were not given any due process at all, so their rights were violated. The issue of due process for immigrants is at the heart. I mean, there's a whole bunch of immigration cases, but one that stood out is Reno versus Flores, which is a 1993 Supreme Court case, and it's returned to the spotlight with the surge of family separations recently. This case led to an agreement requiring the government to release children to their parents, a relative, or a licensed program within 20 days. In the ruling, conservative Justice Antonin Scalia wrote, and this is a quote from him, remember he's conservative,
Very.
"It is well established that the 5th Amendment entitles aliens to due process of law in deportation proceedings," end of quote. On the other hand, access to certain public benefits may be limited for undocumented immigrants. Contrary to some information that's been out there, they may not receive public benefits that require documents that verify their citizenship. That is why they are called undocumented. They have no legal United States documentation. So you have to really, and I'm not going to go into this, but you can look it up. There are certain things, I know there was a lot out there saying, oh, people are getting Medicaid, these illegal immigrants are getting Medicaid and they're getting food stamps and da-da-da-da-da. Well, not if they don't have any documentation. There's some fine print there, though, that you have to look at. There are, depending on where they're at in their immigration status, if they've been given a hearing, and like I said, I don't want to go, I don't have the details here, but I saw them, I read them. There may be some like temporary assistance that some agencies might provide them, but they are not out there getting like full-blown Medicaid or
monthly checks.
Foods. No. That's why they're called undocumented. They don't have the documentation to get those things.
This is great that you broke that down. And I just want to go back in the script to where you say the 4th Amendment protects, the word you have here is individuals. It doesn't say citizens. It doesn't say documented immigrants. It says the 4th Amendment protects individuals.
Right.
I'm an individual. You're an individual. Mm-hmm. My neighbor down the street is from another country. He is an individual. So what about rights of immigrants?
Oh.
We talked about that. What about the rights of the special visas?
Special visas. Yeah. So these are a lot of times like students that come here from foreign countries, or I know of like in Logansport, I know of a person where the wife, they're from one of the Caribbean countries, but the wife came here. She teaches a language, I'm pretty sure. And this local school system has gone out and brought in people from other countries to fill some of their positions in the last few years. So they hired her while her husband came here on a special visa connected to her because she was coming here to teach. But it took, the process for his took a little longer. So he was here legally, but he had to wait on it. But anyway, so they're here on a special visa because her position was only for a certain number of years to then with the possibility of renewal.
Reviewing it again. So
and some people might come for other types of jobs where they're maybe here to the company to try them out, or maybe if things work out and they want to move here, they can later try to get citizenship. Specific rights of immigrants on special visas, it depends on the type of visa they hold and the terms of their visa. And again, that's going to depend on whether they're here as a student or a worker or whatever. Many of the same constitutional rights that apply to undocumented immigrants do also apply to those on special visas, such as due process, freedom of speech, the right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. Depending on the visa type, immigrants on special visas may have access to certain public benefits or employment opportunities that are not available to undocumented immigrants. Some special visas, like those for students or temporary workers, may have special protections related to their status. To kind of wrap this up, it's really crucial, as I said a few minutes ago, to understand that immigration laws and policies are really complex and they vary. That's why I said, looking up the thing about, can immigrants get Medicaid and all that stuff. You really have to understand have at least some understanding of how this works, and that it wouldn't be possible. So some consider immigration to be a privilege. The U.S. Supreme Court has established that immigrants, regardless of status, are entitled to certain constitutional rights and protections.
Hard stop.
Exactly. All right, misconception number 5, and I think this is our last one for this episode.
So I'm going to do it in a voice, okay? So aren't presidential executive orders laws? And then I look at somebody and be like, say what?
No, presidential executive orders are not laws in the sense that they don't go through the legislative process of being passed by Congress and signed by the president, which if you think back to, we haven't gone into great detail, but the job of Congress, it's called the legislative branch.
They are law
Legislate
makers.
means to make laws.
Yes.
So they have that, they are granted that right by the Constitution.
That is their exact job.
President is not.
And a lot of these executive orders seem like they're easily peeled back when a different party takes control because they're not laws and it's harder to repeal a law.
Right. And I think you'll understand why that is as we get into this just a little bit more. But keep in mind, though, that even though they're not laws such as the kind that go through Congress and are signed by the president, they do carry the force of federal law and direct the actions of the executive branch. Executive orders really are directives from the president. They're issued by the president to help manage the operations of the federal government and its agencies, because remember, the executive branch includes the president and the cabinet. Like, he oversees the
lots of
17
departments, the Department of Education.
So that's really what executive orders are directing, is different cabinet areas. They are not legislation like laws passed by Congress. They don't require legislative approval. While not laws in the legislative sense, executive orders are binding on the executive branch and can impact how the government operates and how laws are implemented. With an executive order, the president can't write a new law or statute, but an order can tell a federal agency how to implement a statute that already exists. With an executive order, a president can order the federal government to take any steps that are within the scope of the constitutional authority of the executive branch and do not violate any federal law. So, kind of going back to your question, so that's why a lot of times they change, because different presidents come in with different legislative agendas.
Yep.
So like they want for example, like right now, they're wanting to do away with the Department of Education. So they have tried to take away a lot of things. Well, whereas the next president might come in and say, no, we need to do those. So they are going to do away with maybe some executive orders from this administration and write their own that might change things back completely, or
sort of yo-yo.
Or maybe it's going to be a like-minded president and they're going to continue whatever the process is of eliminating the Department of Education.
It's a process we have to physically live through each time there's a change in the executive job.
Right. As long as they're not violating an already existing federal law, they do hold some legal scope within the executive branch. But keep in mind, the Constitution has a set of checks and balances written into it. We talked about that. So that no one branch of the government is more powerful than the other. So the president can't use or should not use an executive order to sidestep those checks and balances. And the president should not be able to take powers over from other branches, such as the power vested in Congress to pass new laws or statutes, or the courts to invalidate certain laws as unconstitutional. So basically, executive orders direct the various departments under the authority of the president or the executive branch on how to implement their department directives. Executive orders, just to kind of give you an example, can be simple, such as if you hear like the president has declared a period of mourning, like say when President Carter died last year.
Flags come down.
Yeah. Or they want to establish a new holiday. Or if you want to think something that's more important, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order, which did not free all of the slaves.
Right.
It freed some of the slaves before the end of the Civil War. However, since most or many of them did not find out about the Emancipation Proclamation, that's why I say it was supposed to have the effect of freeing slavery or essentially making it illegal, but a lot of times the slaves in the South didn't know of its existence. And it happened halfway through the war, 1863. So, but, I think he used it as a step to basically tell the South, we're not backing down.
Put them on notice.
Yeah,
Here's what's in the forecast.
But that was an executive order that really held a lot of, maybe not immediate impact, but the intent was there, and it does eventually. Harry Truman's executive order to integrate the military in the late 1940s, that was an executive order.
If executive orders aren't really laws, what prevents them from violating existing laws or our rights?
So that was a good question. Executive orders are subject to judicial review, just like any other law, like a law passed by Congress is. So they can be challenged in the courts and can eventually end up in the Supreme Court if, they want to challenge the lower courts. Let's say a lower court rules against an executive order, and then the executive branch wants to challenge that. It can go to the Supreme Court. The concept of judicial review, which is really the main function of the federal court system, it allows the federal judicial branch to review and potentially invalidate actions of either of the other two branches of government. So either the executive or the legislative, president or Congress. This means that federal courts can examine the legality and constitutionality of executive orders just like they would any other law that's made by Congress. If a court finds that an executive order exceeds the president's authority or violates the Constitution or a federal law, it can be struck down. Judicial review of executive orders serves as a check on the president's power, ensuring that actions taken by the executive branch do stay within the legal boundaries. Courts can review executive orders based on several factors. First of all, does the order exceed the president's constitutional or statutory authority? Does the order violate the Constitution? Does the order conflict with some other federal law? Several high-profile cases have involved judicial review of executive orders. For example, and this is the most recent one I could find, challenges in the first Trump administration to the travel ban that he tried to do with an executive order. It was challenged. It was obviously in place for a bit, and it was challenged, and it was considered unlawful. Also, a lower federal court could issue an injunction to prevent an implementation of an executive order or an enforcement of an executive order. Of course, then that can be challenged, and there are federal appeals courts, and then it can also eventually make it to the Supreme Court. And we've seen some of that rattling around here in the last 6 months in particular, with actions that have been taken that certain agencies don't agree with and think that the executive is overstepping. And by the way, before we end this, anybody that wants to see executive orders are public knowledge.
Yeah.
And then you find them, you can look them up. They're in the Federal Register. So If you want to see what's there and what other presidents have, passed.
Or how many other presidents have passed.
I can tell you that the current president's way ahead of everybody else.
We covered a lot today.
Mm-hmm. We covered 5 common misconceptions, and I've already started a list of some that we can do in the future. But, the main thing is there's a lot to be sorted out, and I just hope that we cleared up some of the most common misconceptions that people have. And I don't ever want to hear anybody say, I can say that, I have freedom of speech.
I won't. There are no consequences.
Right, because it may or may not be true. At this point, my plan is for our next episode to look at civic responsibilities. I haven't started that yet.
Can you give me... Can I pick your brain for an example?
Most people, the first thing that comes to mind is voting, but there are other things that we as citizens can do. We can do things like in our community, maybe teaching. There's like a place in town where they try to teach immigrants about volunteer to help people understand or help somebody study for citizenship exam.
Or a driving test, or maybe they start an educational nonpartisan podcast.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, somebody wanting to become a citizen, they have to study those 100 questions because they don't know. They're going to be asked a randomized set, not 100.
Right, but a portion.
But they have to be prepared to answer. I'm sorry, citizens that already are citizens. Many of you don't know the answers to most of them. So,
and I'll just add to that, I would have fallen into that boat before we started this podcast. I knew some of them. Would I get a 100 on that test? No. If you gave me that test and there were 100 questions, which you just said there aren't, but if there were 100 questions, I guarantee you I would miss some questions. And I was born in America, went to school here, and admit that I still have room for growth in learning what my role as a citizen is and how our government works.
I took the test. This was back when I was still teaching, so 11 years ago, and I think I missed 3 questions. So
that's an A.
Right.
Well,
but still, I'm a civics teacher. I should get them all right? But
well, I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes saying that we have room for growth is good.
In my defense, some of the ways, the way they word some of them
ambiguously
is a little. They needed a better test writer.
Did you tell them that? No. Right at the bottom of it, see me after class. All right, Mrs. Fisher.
Speaking of tests.
Yeah, let's do a pop quiz. Bueller.
All right, so last episode's question was, who makes federal laws? And I kind of gave a hint that there was more than one way to answer it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's really only one answer, but you can give it. It's either Congress, or you could say the legislative branch, or you could say the House of Representatives and the Senate, which are what make up Congress or the legislative branch. So any of those 3 answers was acceptable.
All right, so hopefully you got that correct. If not, we learned something on this episode. All right, so thank you. So what is our next question?
This episode's question from the U.S. naturalization test is, what are the 2 parts of the U.S. Congress called?
And I was going to say.
just said them, so you should remember. The 2 parts of the U.S. Congress, what are they called?
Yeah, you're just asking that to see if we're paying attention. I'm on to your ways. All right, Bobby, thank you. That was fun. And I think we'll do that one again. What do you think?
Like I said, I've already got 3 things written down for the next time.
All right, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for your work to get us here today. That's it for this episode of Plain Civics, breaking down the basics. No politics, just facts. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.
This is Plain Civics. Join us for the journey as we break down the basics of how government works so you can make the government work for you.